Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host. Norman Osborn has always been a thorn in Spidey's side, but he's just one in a long line of Goblin foes. Since Stan Lee and Steve Ditko introduced the original Green Goblin in Amazing Spider-Man number 14, the Goblin roster has exploded. From Green Goblins to Hobgoblins, Grey Goblins to Demo Goblins. Peter's faced them all. They've been friends, lovers, colleagues, and foes. Count in the alternate universe and time-traveling Goblins, and you've got a gallery as vast as the symbiotes. Each one has shaken up Spidey's world in their own way. In this video, we'll explore Spider-Man's 44 most impactful Goblin-themed villains. So, without further ado, let's get started. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you.
We can't do this.
Don't be a coward.
The original Green Goblin. Norman Osborn's story is pretty wild. He was born to a rich guy, Amberson Osborn, but things go south when Amberson's business tanks, which turns him into a violent and abusive alcoholic. Norman and his mum get the worst of it, with Amberson lashing out at them big time. This tough upbringing makes Norman tough as nails. He even kills the family dog because he sees it as a problem. Later in life, Norman graduates from business and chemistry at college and sets up Oscorp with his science professor, Dr. Mendel Strom. He's a success, but also a bit of a shark. When Strom dips into company funds, Norman gets him arrested for embezzlement and takes over Oscorp. With Strom out of the picture, Norman dives into developing a strength-enhancing formula they were working on. Norman then finds more of Strom's notes, which he thinks are the key to perfecting the formula. But when he tries it out, it blows up in his face, landing him in the hospital. He recovers super fast though, getting stronger and smarter. Enter the Green Goblin. Norman goes full villain, aiming to take over the criminal underworld by beating New York's new friendly neighborhood hero, Spider-Man. He starts with a jet broomstick and later upgrades to the iconic Goblin glider. He figures out Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker, his son Harry's best friend, and he's one of the first villains to learn about Spider-Man's real identity. Norman becomes Spider-Man's top enemy, especially after he kills Peter's girlfriend, Gwen Stacy. He then vanishes for a bit, and his son Harry, and even Harry Shrink, take up the Green Goblin mantle. Norman makes a comeback in the 90s. Revealing he's been pulling strings all along. He ramps up his feud with Spider-Man by killing Peter's so-called brother, Ben Reilly, and continues to mess with Peter by knowing his secret identity. As time goes on, we see more of Norman's crazy side, but also this weird respect for Spider-Man. He even wants Peter to take over as the Goblin heir. Norman's obsession gets personal, attacking Peter's loved ones, making the hatred even more intense. So yeah, Norman Osborn's story is a roller coaster of money, power, and a whole lot of crazy. Ultimate Green Goblin. In the Ultimate Universe, or Earth 1610, Norman Osborn, Oscorp's big boss and brains, gets caught up in trying to whip up a super soldier serum for S.H.I.E.L.D. Meanwhile, his family, wife Martha and son Harry, get the cold shoulder, which is kind of expected because Norman somehow nails the art of messing his family ties up. Things get wild at Oscorp when a spider juiced up on the Oz formula bites Peter Parker. Now, the Oz formula is just another name for the super soldier serum, rebranded by Oscorp. Norman figures if spider DNA plus Oz equals spider powers, his DNA plus Oz should make him super him. Spoiler alert, yeah, it doesn't. The experiment backfires big time, turning Norman into a monster, a super monster nonetheless. In a fit of rage, this goblin monster kills Martha and almost gets Harry, who barely escapes their burning house. Next, he crashes Harry's school, but Spider-Man steps in. The brawl ends with Goblin taking a dive into the river and everyone thinking he's dead. But no, Norman survives. He has this freaky power to turn into the Goblin whenever he wants, thanks to regular shots of Oz. The downside is that he's tripping big time, seeing the world through a blood-red filter and getting haunted by imaginary plasmids. Norman grabs Harry, blames his rival Justin Hammer for the explosion, and moves back to the city. He confronts Parker, trying to blackmail him into quitting the Spider-Man gig and working for him. When Parker says no, Goblin snatches Mary Jane and tries to kill her. Spider-Man and S.H.I.E.L.D. swoop in. Harry ends up stabbing his dad with a window shard, turning him back to Norman. Later, Norman teams up with his old pal Dr. Otto Octavius for a prison break. They snatch Spider-Man, forcing him to join their Ultimate Six Squad. Norman has this twisted idea that Peter is his real son and should be with him. The showdown happens at the White House with the Ultimates. Harry, used as a pawn by Nick Fury, begs his dad to stop the madness. Fun fact, in Earth 1610, Nick Fury is the first one to be injected with the super soldier serum, and Steve is actually the second. Just when Goblin is about to change back, Iron Man hits him with a blast that messes him up badly. He goes berserk, gets taken down by S.H.I.E.L.D., and is hauled back to the Slammer, leaving Harry in shock. Red Goblin. After Spider-Man hits him with a cure that takes away his powers, Norman can't use his goblin formula to get them back. So he tries the magic route by heading to the temple with no name. But they kick him out for being too much of a bad dude. I am not shocked, are you? Even his attempt to sneak into the Sanctum Sanctorum flops. Next thing we know, Norman gets his hands on the Carnage symbiote. This thing not only fixes his face, but also dumps the nanites that have been blocking his powers. He figures, why not mix the goblin formula with the symbiote? And before long, he becomes this goblin symbiote hybrid. He begins by kidnapping J. Jonah Jameson to find out Spider-Man's real identity, and during their conversation, he realizes that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker. At the Daily Bugle, Norman faces off with Spider-Man, revealing his new Carnage combo. He morphs into the super monstrous Red Goblin, scaring the daylights out of Spidey. Norman gives Peter an ultimatum. Peter should quit being Spider-Man or watch everyone he loves suffer. Spider-Man agrees, and the Red Goblin struts off, thinking he's won. Later, in Times Square, Norman goes berserk and launches Carnage bombs everywhere. Spider-Man gets pinned down but plays a mind game, taunting Goblin about who'll get the credit for killing him. Will it be Carnage or Osborn? Norman, ego bruised, ditches the symbiote and fistfights with Spider-Man. Norman tries to rebond with Carnage, but Spidey tortures it, frying Norman's brain. Now, Norman's in Ravencroft Asylum, thinking he's Cletus Cassidy and that Spider-Man is Norman Osborn. Spider-Man leaves him in his deluded state, marking the end of Norman Osborn as we knew him. Iron Goblin. So, Iron Man's story on Earth 19919 takes him on a wild ride that turns him into an obnoxiously powerful version of Green Goblin. He's doing his usual superhero thing until he gets hit with the spider virus. That turns him into one of the Spider Queen's pawns. Spider Queen is basically a mutant who's the only known member of the species called Homo insectus. Anyway, during a fight at Horizon Labs, Iron Man, along with some other ex-heroes, tries to trap the Resistance fighters, but he gets a face full of Goblin formula. He morphs into the Iron Goblin, combining his Iron Man armor with some experimental goblin gear. Then he tips off Agent Venom about where the Spider Queen's brainiacs are hanging out. Personality-wise, Stark's a mixed bag. Post-Spider-Virus, he practically worships the Spider Queen and looks down on humans. But after the Goblin formula splash, he's back to his human self. Well, at least for a bit. He even apologizes to Eugene Thompson or Agent Venom for his past misdeeds. But the formula starts messing with his head, making him paranoid and loopy. Despite having a suit that can fly, he mostly zooms around on a goblin glider. Realizing he's slipping into madness, Stark decides to go out as a hero, fighting off the Spider Queen's forces to save his buddies. Two-Faced Goblin. The Two-Faced Goblin appears in the Amalgam comics, as the name suggests. He's like a wild mix of DC's Two-Face, aka Harvey Dent, and Marvel's Green Goblin. Born as Harvey Osborn, this guy's living it up in New Gotham City until, well, of course, half his face gets wrecked. He's convinced that Logan Wayne, that's Darklaw, a mashup of Wolverine and Batman, is to blame, so he's out for revenge as the Two-Faced Goblin. Unlike Marvel's Green Goblin, this guy doesn't fly solo, though. He's the big boss of the Terrible Three, with Amalgam's versions of Scarecrow and Silicon Man as his crew. Then things get really heated. Two-Faced Goblin finds himself in a scrap with Speed Demon. Think The Flash meets Ghost Rider. In a twist, Goblin kills his own Terrible Three teammates, who had been mind-jacked by Speed Demon's enemy, Night Spectre. But then Night Spectre pulls a fast one and possesses Goblin himself. In the end, Speed Demon steps up and knocks both Night Spectre and Goblin out of the game. Galactic Goblin. Galactic Goblin, aka Norman Osborn, belongs to Earth 2099. This guy's been around since the Heroic Age, duking it out with the OG Spider-Man. He's kept himself young for ages by using his Goblin serum, but the real dark thing about him is that he's been draining the blood of his descendants. This Osborn creates something called the Black Cards, which are basically a ticket to the top of the social ladder. He's also in with the Masters of Evil, a supervillain team that includes Baron Zemo, Black Knight, Enchantress, Melter, Patriot, and Radioactive Man. He leads them as Patriot in a fight with the Avengers of the year 2098. They pretty much wipe out the Avengers, which stops a new heroic age from starting. While the Masters go off to space for some cosmic conquests, Osborn chooses to remain on Earth and set up the Cabal, which is basically an evil version of the Illuminati. A year later, Osborn catches wind of Victor Von Doom's plan to kill a Celestial named Jovian. The Cabal has stolen the Celestial's body and crashed it into Earth, creating the Celestial Garden in what used to be the Wastelands. They even hire Hawkeye to take out Nostromo, the new ruler of Latveria, after Doom vanishes. Osborn throws out a bounty for securing the garden for the Cabal, but Winter Soldier, hired by the new Spider-Man, Miguel O'Hara, shuts that down. When the Masters of Evil return to Earth to claim the garden, Osborn lets Spider-Man and the new Avengers handle them. But then, Osborn shows up at the garden as the Galactic Goblin, ready to rumble. He goes head-to-head with future Spider-Man Miguel, but ends up getting his arm sliced by Valkyrie and beaten down by Spider-Man. To top it off, Ghost Rider and Nostromo destroy his precious black cards. Busted and cardless, Osborn gets arrested, and the X-Men claim the Celestial Garden. Gold Goblin. Gold Goblin is one of the latest versions of Norman Osborn in Earth 616. By now, his sins have been erased by the Sin Eater, but even so, the ghosts of people he has killed as Green Goblin continue to haunt him, especially the ghosts of Gwen and Harry. Norman's now Peter Parker's boss and hooks him up with a sweet new suit. This gear comes with a spider glider named Bug, and apart from the glider, Peter receives plenty of other high-tech gadgets. Meanwhile, Spider-Man is investigating a case related to Roderick Kingsley and Ned Leeds, one of whom turns into the Hobgoblin once again. Spider-Man is put into a tough spot, almost getting whooped by them as both of them become Hobgoblins. Norman, watching from afar, decides to jump in with a prototype spider suit he's been working on. He swoops in to save Peter, and the media catches on. The media calls him the Gold Goblin. Norman's not too excited about the title at first, but he rolls with it and ends up taking down Jack-o'-lantern. But it's not all smooth sailing. Demons hit New York, and a vengeful Ben Reilly, now called Chasm, comes after Norman. Ben, disguised as Peter, messes with Norman's tech, leaving him vulnerable. In the aftermath, Norman gets a serious beatdown from Ben. However, the Gold Goblin's full power set is still a bit of a mystery. The Gold Goblin miniseries was launched last year. If there's enough people wanting us to explore the story, well, we'll give it the green light. Grey Goblin. So, Harry Osborn, before his death, hatched this twisted plot to mess with his dad, Norman, his ex-buddy, Peter Parker, and Mary Jane. He teamed up with Mendel Stromm and set up a secret lab in Paris. There, they cooked up two kids using Norman and Gwen Stacy's DNA, a boy, Gabriel, and a girl, Sarah. The whole point was to make everyone believe that Gwen had an affair with Norman and that these were their kids. Harry even gets Mysterio to plant fake memories in Norman and Mary Jane to sell the lie. The twins grow up thinking this twisted story is true, all thanks to an AI based on Harry and Norman. However, the twins age super fast because of Norman's wacky blood. They keep dying young, and Mephisto keeps bringing them back. He's grooming them to snatch Spider-Man's soul to stop a future where Spider-Man's daughter ends his reign. A few years later, Sarah and Gabriel are now adults, still clueless about their real story. They're tricked into thinking Peter's their dad and the reason their mum's dead. They find this old letter from Gwen, hinting she was pregnant with twins. Peter digs up some DNA from Gwen's grave, and Mary Jane, with her fake memories, spills that Norman's their dad. Gabriel, now fully buying into the lie, goes berserk, thinking Spider-Man ditched them. He finds a hideout Norman mentioned, shoots himself up with Goblin formula, and suits up as the Grey Goblin. He crashes the hospital where Spider-Man is saving Sarah, ready to take him out. But in a wild turn, Sarah shoots his Goblin glider, it explodes, and Gabriel loses his memories. Black Goblin. Harry Osborn from Earth 19529. His story is a bit different from the usual. No time-sliding shenanigans. What exactly is time-sliding? Well, time-sliding or floating time in comics refers to a narrative technique used to manage the passage of time within a comic book universe. Characters in these comics typically don't age at the same rate as in real life. For example, a character like Spider-Man might be depicted as a high school student for many years in the real world, even though decades have passed since the character was introduced. A character originally written as a veteran of a particular historical event might later be portrayed as a veteran of a more recent conflict. So, back in 1966, Peter Parker gets Harry's dad, Norman, thrown in jail. This leaves young Harry to take over Oscorp. 11 years later, in 1977, Harry gets engaged to Mary Jane Watson, but the pressure of his business and marriage gets to him, which gets exacerbated by a drug habit. His dad, still in the clink, talks Harry into grabbing a clone from Miles Warren's lab. Harry, now going as the Black Goblin, hits the lab and finds, surprise, clones of Peter and Gwen. Harry flips out when he realizes his dad's playing favorites with Peter. In a fit of rage, he wrecks the lab, leaving only Peter's clone alive. The twist is that the Gwen at the lab was the real Gwen, and the Gwen that Peter married was the clone. Guilt-ridden, Harry dumps MJ the next year, leaving her a stack of cash before he ghosts. Goblin 2099 AD. Jennifer D'Angelo from Earth 928 is a priest, but not really your run-of-the-mill priest. No. Working at St. Patrick's Cathedral in downtown Nueva York, she often bumps into Spider-Man during his downtown adventures. The interesting bit is that she's Dana D'Angelo's sister. You know, the fiancée of Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099. But Jennifer and Miguel have never met because of some bad blood between the sisters. Now, here's where it gets spicy. Jennifer has this alter ego, Goblin. Well, as I mentioned earlier, she's a different kind of priest and isn't just your regular church-going type. You can almost always find her trying to figure out ways of stirring up trouble in downtown. Her goal is to knock Spider-Man off his perch as the local hero. She even spreads rumors that Spidey is a corporate puppet for Alchemax. Goblin teams up with Vulture to take down Spider-Man. Jennifer, as Goblin, is really set on showing the gangs and folks like Casey Nash that Spider-Man isn't the hero they think he is. Gwen Stacy Green Goblin. Gwen Stacy, Working at Oscorp with her crew Harry Osborn, Mary Jane Watson and Peter Parker get into some heavy stuff. After Harry's bit by a radioactive spider and turns into Spider-Man, Gwen steps up her game and crafts her own goblin armor and goblin glider to become the Green Goblin. The duo, Harry and Gwen, are out there keeping New York City safe. Peter and Mary Jane have their backs, but things take a tragic turn. Sandman goes on a rampage at an NYPD precinct, and the chaos leads to the deaths of both Harry and Gwen's dad, George Stacy. That hits Gwen hard. The shock messes with her biofeedback circuitry, trapping her in a goblin persona for years. Peter and Mary Jane have been on a mission to find her and reverse what happened. The breakthrough comes when another dimension's Gwen Stacy shows up. Using their similar pasts, she figures out where Goblin Gwen is hiding. Once they get there, Mary Jane manages to break through to Gwen, helping her snap out of her goblin loop. Back to her old self, Gwen's smarts kick in, and she whips up something called the ticket to the multiverse for Spider-Gwen. Peter Parker, Green Goblin. In the House of M universe, Peter Parker's story takes a much darker turn than his 616 counterpart after Gwen Stacy's death. Overcome with anger, he ends up killing the Green Goblin. After that intense moment, Peter hangs up his Spider-Man suit for good. But he doesn't just walk away from the superhero life, he becomes the Goblin himself. Now, as the Goblin, Peter's on the radar of these bad news beings called the Inheritors, who are hunting down folks like him, dubbed Spider Totems. Things get more complicated when a Spider-Woman from another dimension shows up. She's trying to pull together this army of Spider heroes to fend off the Inheritors. Initially, Peter's not keen on joining the fight, but then Spider-Woman reveals she's Gwen Stacy from another world. This hits Peter hard. Remembering he couldn't save his Gwen, he makes a heroic choice. He sacrifices himself to protect this alternate Gwen, doing for her what he couldn't do in his own timeline. Marvel Noir Green Goblin. Born with this reptile-like skin condition, Norman Osborn from the Spider-Man Noir story arc of Earth 90214 is a sideshow act and gets a lot of flack from the audience. That rough start fuels his drive to earn respect, but not in the way you'd expect. He climbs his way up to become a feared mob boss in the underworld, calling himself the Goblin. To hide his unique look, he always wears a mask. Norman isn't just any mob boss, he's clever. He gathers a bunch of former circus and carnival performers, each with their own weird but dangerous skills, and forms the Enforcers. These guys are notorious in New York City, doing all the dirty work for politicians and big shots, from quashing protests to taking out anyone who gets in their way. This is where Spider-Man comes into the picture. The Goblins send the Vulture to kill Spider-Man's uncle, which puts them at odds. But things get even messier. Reporter Ben Urich starts causing trouble for Norman, so he has the Chameleon, disguised as J.J. Jameson, take him out. But then Felicia Hardy, Urich's girlfriend, takes down the Chameleon. The Goblin snatches Felicia and makes a run for it, but Spider-Man's hot on his trail. While Spidey's dealing with the Goblin's goons, Kraven accidentally spills a jar of spiders on himself. Spider-Man rescues Jameson and sets his sights on Osborn. Their fight is crazy. Masks come off, revealing Spider-Man as Peter Parker and the Goblin as the green-scaled Norman Osborn. Peter chooses not to end Norman, but then Kraven, now a spider-infested mess, jumps in and seemingly takes out Osborn. Norman and Harry Russell, Goblins by Night. Norman Russell, once a ruthless billionaire, gets hit with lycanthropy, but with a goblin twist. Every now and then, he turns into this terrifying creature, Goblin by Night, while his human side gets paralyzed. One night, Goblin by Night attacks Peter Parker in Central Park. Tragically, Peter's Uncle Ben and Aunt May get caught in the crossfire and don't make it. Right after, Peter gets bitten by a mystical radioactive spider, which not only saves his life, but also gives him some wild powers. He becomes Arachnite, a new kind of vigilante. Meanwhile, Norman's son Harry discovers his dad's secret the hard way, seeing him morph back into his human form. Harry steps up to help his dad manage these crazy transformations. Fast forward 15 years, Harry and Peter are tight, with Harry being Peter's right-hand man. Peter stumbles upon Norman's secret when he visits Norman's house with Harry. That night, Norman transforms again, and Arachnite ends up in a throwdown with the Goblin in Central Park, clueless that it's Norman. The fight gets intense. Harry tries to intervene with a taser, but the damage is done. Norman changes back, Harry rushes him away. The next day at Parker Industries, where Harry's treating Norman, the curse strikes again. Norman bites Harry, fatally wounding him, and then goes after Peter. The two end up in a wild brawl, crashing out of a window. Peter, in full Arachnite gear, manages to save them with his web shooter. But just as Peter's about to finish the Goblin off, a dying Harry steps in. He pleads with Harry to stop, pointing out that Norman wasn't in control when he killed the Parkers, but Peter was about to kill Norman on purpose. Harry transforms into the Goblin by Night, revealing that Norman's bite has passed the curse to him. With Norman now curse-free, Peter vows to help him and find a cure for Harry. 1602 Green Goblin. This Norman Osborn dedicates his life to finding the source, a mysterious power behind folks like Virginia Dare, a changeling, and David Banner, this world's Hulk. Green Goblin cozies up to King James I of England and tries to stir up trouble between American colonists and natives on Roanoke Island, all to get his hands on his power. But his plan flops. The source vanishes when Royaz, the Native American Captain America, or this world's Steve Rogers, gets sent back to his time, and Osborn ends up getting captured after peace is restored and the English are booted from America. 3 years after Roanoke becomes its own nation, Osborn tries to change the status quo. He starts playing nice by first boosting the colony's defenses against giant dinosaurs and then tries to become the harbor master, all while still plotting against the natives with some pretty nasty tactics. He tries to give them smallpox-infested blankets, but the spider steps in. Then, Osborn takes it too far and kills Virginia Dare when she tries to expose him. He's caught and brought before the court. Capital punishment's off the table in the new American nation, so they decide to ship him back to England for trial. On the Mayflower, Osborn tries to kill Peter, who's keeping an eye on him, but then pirate Wilson Fisk, Fisk with an E, attacks the ship. A cannonball hits Osborn's cell, leaving him with gangrene. Thinking he won't make it, they ditch the plan to try him in England. Osborn, desperate to survive, strikes a deal with Henry Le Pym. Once again, this is Hank Pym, to get cured in exchange for some of Peter's blood. Next thing you know, Osborn's transformed into a winged goblin, working for Victor Octavius. Osborn faces off against the spider in Venice, but his luck runs out when he accidentally catches an arrow bolt from Bullseye, right in the head. And just like that, Osborn's wild ride comes to a sudden end. Goblin King. Phil Urich's journey began in Web of Spider-Man number 125, and this guy's been all over the map. Firstly, he's Ben Urich's nephew. Now, if you're scratching your heads, Ben Urich is the investigative journalist from Daredevil. One day, he's accompanying his uncle to Oscorp Tower for some detective work. They get jumped by some bad guys, and Phil stumbles upon a Green Goblin suit and gets a taste of the Goblin formula. Naturally, he gets powers and uses them to save his uncle. Phil probably thinks to himself that he can make the Green Goblin a good guy. Alas, not as easy as he thought. Fast forward a bit, and Phil's mind has taken a dive. He becomes the new Hobgoblin, but Spider-Man blows his cover. No sweat, Phil switches gears, becoming the Goblin Knight under the Green Goblin's wing. Norman Osborn gets knocked down again, so Phil steps up as the Goblin King and leads what's left of the Goblin Nation. But, as luck would have it, things go south. Last we see of him, Phil, as the Goblin King, is trying to swipe some high-tech energy source from Alchemax. That flops, and he ends up face-to-face with Red Goblin, who goes full savage and, of course, Carnage-esque and rips out Phil's heart. Ouch. But hey, it's the Goblin world. Dying doesn't always stick. Somehow, Phil's back in action. Phil's the perfect first nemesis for Normie, and irrespective of him joining hands with Norman or fighting against him, them both sharing a panel or screen is bound to be awesome. Monster Goblin. Growing up, Carly Cooper idolized her dad Ray, a top-notch forensic officer with the NYPD. Her world becomes a roller coaster when Dr. Octopus and Spider-Man do the old mind switcheroo. Right before Dr. Octopus, in Peter's body, breathes his last, he spills the beans to Carly about who he really is. Carly, smelling something fishy with Spider-Man's behavior, digs deeper. With a little help from Yuri Watanabe, she figures out the truth about Otto Octavius and Peter's body swap. Just when Carly thought things couldn't get crazier, she discovers Peter's body is missing from his grave. Then, all of a sudden, she's nabbed by the Goblin Underground and grilled for Spider-Man's real identity. Refusing to crack, Carly gets hit with the Goblin formula by the Green Goblin himself, turning her into this goblin-like creature he calls Monster. Want to talk? I mean, the audacity to call others monsters. Anyway, her old self gets buried under this transformation. Even when the Goblin King, who claims to be Norman Osborn, presses her for Spider-Man's ID, Carly stands her ground, demanding Osborn unmask himself first. As Monster, Carly joins the Goblins' army raid on Octavius' Spider Island too. She tracks Octavius to Parker Industries and takes down Wraith, but then Otto accidentally busts her earpiece, cutting off the Goblin King's eavesdropping. Carly, fighting for control, tells Otto she needs his smarts to fix this mess. Eventually, Carly gets cured of her Goblin state by a concoction whipped up by Sajani Jaffrey. After the Goblin King's defeat and Peter reclaiming his body, Carly decides to leave New York and Spider-Man behind. Lord Osborn, Goblin. In Earth 803, Norman Osborn, or as he's known, Lord Osborn, is quite the scholarly type. He and May Riley, aka Lady Spider, are both university mates. They meet at a swanky New York socialite bash, where Lord Osborn smoothly approaches Lady Riley for a dance. But then, out of nowhere, Electro crashes the party, aiming to snatch the mare. May slips away, suits up as Lady Spider, and jumps into action to take down Electro. But wait, there's more. The Green Goblin, who's actually Osborn in disguise, no surprises there, rolls up with his crew, the 6 men of Sinistry, the 6 men of Sinestry. Thereafter, some secret plans the nightmares got stashed in his tux. Despite their sneaky plot, Lady Spider's on her game and throws a webby wrench in their plans. The villains have to beat a hasty retreat thanks to Lady Spider putting up a solid fight. Goblin Guard. In Earth 982, Norman Osborn, instead of killing May Parker, kidnaps her and hands her over to Alison Mongrain. Then comes this fight with Spider-Man where Norman, in a seriously wild move, blows off Spider-Man's leg, but he seemingly meets his end in a blast from his own pumpkin bomb. Classic Goblin exit, if you consider the first Spider-Man movie. Years later, it's his grandson Normie's turn to don the Green Goblin gear. Seems like the Goblin legacy is a family affair in this universe. Old Man Green Goblin. In Earth 21923, the Green Goblin, aka Norman Osborn, is part of this massive bad guy crew set on world domination. There's a huge fight in New York, with Osborn and Spider-Man going at it. After the dust settles, Osborn ends up ruling a chunk of America. That's America with a K, dubbed Osborn County. But things get heated when a squad of heroes, part of Dr. Doom's master plan, roll into Osborn County. Green Goblin confronts Ant-Man, giving him grief for not revealing his secret deal with Dr. Doom. Ant-Man, totally fed up, unleashes a swarm of insects he controls and wipes out Green Goblin and his villain buddies. Madeline Pryor, Green Goblin Queen. So, many of you must know that Madeline Pryor is the clone of Jean Grey and the mother of Cable. On one fine morning, she's going about her day, chilling and catching up on the news, when she finds out Jean Grey's alive and back with Scott. Madeline smashes the computer screen, which knocks her out cold. While she's out, a limbo demon named Sim crashes her mind with this creepy nightmare. In it, her husband shows up, tells her he's done with her, and takes their kid, Nathan. Then things get weird. He strips Madeline of everything: clothes, hair, even her face, and gives it all to a mannequin that turns out to be Jean Grey. Madeline's left as this featureless figure, stuck in a scorching desert. Sim pops up in this nightmare, offering her a deal to become something more. He shows her images: a girl, a pilot, a woman, a demon, kinda like a reflection of her past, present, and what she could be. Madeline, thinking it's all just a dream, picks the demon route. That's when Sim stabs her with his finger. Next thing we know, she's dressed in this edgy black leather getup, foreshadowing her transformation into the Goblin Queen. Harry Osborn. Harry Osborn had already started to obsess over Spider-Man after he found his father's lifeless body. However, all hell breaks loose after he figures out Peter is Spider-Man. He goes full Green Goblin, wrecks their apartment, and kidnaps Mary Jane, Flash, and Aunt May. After Spider-Man takes him down, Harry blurts out Peter's secret identity, but everyone just thinks he's lost it. He ends up in a medical facility and comes out with a wiped memory. No clue about Spider-Man's real deal or his and his dad's Goblin shenanigans. Back to college, Harry rooms with Flash and starts seeing the Shrink, Bart Hamilton. But Hamilton hypnotizes Harry to spill the Goblin beans, then snags the Goblin mantle for himself. Harry gets dragged back into the Goblin role and ends up in a scuffle where Hamilton bites the dust in an explosion. Later, Harry ties the knot with Liz Allen, meeting her at Ned Leeds and Betty Brant's wedding, and they have a kid named Normie. Things are chill for a while, until the Inferno Crisis messes with Harry's head, bringing back all his Goblin memories and his grudge against Spider-Man. Speaking of the Inferno Crisis, it's a Marvel event in which the demons Nasty and Sim want to unleash a demonic invasion in New York. Needless to say, the event affects the lives of all superheroes living in and around New York. Anyway, convinced his dad was the good guy and Peter is the enemy, Harry attacks as the Green Goblin, using hallucinogens to mess with Peter's mind. Later, Harry decides to finish Spider-Man once and for all, but when it comes down to it, he can't do it and bails, promising he'll be back. Diving into his dad's notes, Harry juices up with a new Goblin formula, getting super strong but also more unhinged. He kidnaps Liz, Normie, and Liz's stepbrother, Mark Raxton, trying to prove he can be the Green Goblin and a family man. Spider-Man shows up, and after a fight, Harry gets taken down again. Normie Harold Osborn. Normie Osborn, Harry's kid, had a tough life growing up. He really struggled with his mom remarrying Foggy Nelson, though they eventually got on the same page after her death. And he had it in for Peter Parker, blaming him for what happened to his dad and granddad. When his mom passes away, Normie hits rock bottom and decides to carry on the family tradition as the Green Goblin. As the new Green Goblin, Normie has a rough start. Spider-Girl, the Golden Goblin, aka Phil Urich, and even Mary Jane Parker keep outsmarting him. Then, when May Parker, aka Spider-Girl, temporarily loses her powers, Normie sees his chance and kidnaps her. He has her all tied up, threatening her with a knife. But it turns out, Normie is actually hoping May will fight back and end him. In a twist, May talks him down, convincing him to seek help and ditch the whole Goblin gig, because honestly, he isn't quite cut out for it. He does continue to serve as Green Goblin though, and wants to resolve the whole Green Goblin versus Spider-Man war once and for all. Proto-Goblin Nels Van Adder, Norman Osborn's research assistant, gets caught up in the whole Goblin mess and it doesn't quite turn out well for him, which is not surprising though. He's a part of the biogenetic Project Supreme, where they're messing around with what will later be known as the Goblin formula. Nell agrees to be the test subject, but without a stabilizing agent, things go south real fast. He turns into this red, mutated creature. One night, cops spot Nels hanging around Osborn's plant. They're on the hunt for a serial killer and stop him for a chat, but Nels freaks out, attacks the cops, and bolts into the plant. There, he finds himself cornered by Police Captain George Stacy, Arthur Stacy, Osborn's new head of security, and a bunch of other guards. After a scuffle where he gets shot by George, Nels manages to escape. The next day, Nels confronts Norman at Mendel Strom's old lab, blaming him for his transformation. Norman is like, "Hey, you signed up for this." But Nels loses it again. Just when he's about to take Norman out, the Stacy brothers swoop in and save the day, tossing Nels out of a window into a river. After that, Nels vanishes, never to be seen again. Barton Hamilton. Dr. Bart Hamilton, Harry Osborn's shrink, has this wild idea while treating Harry to write a thesis on the criminal mind. By hypnotizing Harry, he gets the full scoop on the Green Goblin's history. Then he finds the Goblin's secret stash and starts playing around with the gear. Feeling the power, he decides he's the guy to take up the Green Goblin mantle because, well, why not? Now, with Harry spilling Spider-Man's real identity during therapy, Dr. Hamilton sets his sights on taking down Spider-Man and ruling New York's underworld. He gets Harry to tail Spider-Man and snap pics of him duking it out with his clone. After mailing those pics to J. Jonah Jameson, he wipes Harry's memory of the whole thing. Then, during a session, he pushes Harry's buttons, leading to a fight where he ends up tying Harry up and stepping out as the new Green Goblin. As the Goblin, Hamilton crashes a mob boss meet-up at the World Trade Center, pitching himself as the top dog who can off Spider-Man. Silvermane, one of the crime bosses, somewhat agrees and concludes that the mob bosses would consider Hamilton for the top spot if he can deliver on his promise within 24 hours. Hamilton nearly gets Spider-Man, but Silvermane's crew messes it up, leading to Spider-Man's escape. Furious, Hamilton goes after Silvermane at Radio City Music Hall. Spider-Man tries to intervene, but gets KO'd by one of Goblin's gadgets. Hamilton's about to drop Spider-Man down an incinerator, but Spidey wakes up and saves his own skin. The fight ends with Spider-Man beating Goblin and unmasking him as Dr. Hamilton. But just as Hamilton confesses his grand plan, Harry, also as the Green Goblin, jumps in. Hamilton gets caught in an explosion. Lily Hollister. Lily Hollister was initially dating Harry Osborn, but Harry was actually a clone created by an AI version of Norman Osborn. Lucky for Lily, clone Harry doesn't have any of the Green Goblin baggage, but Goblin trouble finds its way to her instead. Lily stumbles upon one of Norman's secret labs in their house, thanks to an old journal of Harry's. She gets exposed to some of Norman's chemicals and becomes the Grey Goblin, known as Menace. She's got all the Goblin powers and rage, but nobody connects her to her alter ego at first. Lily as Menace goes full-on villain. She wrecks her own dad's mayoral campaign, attacking his ads and even their home, all while playing the sweet daughter by day. The real drama begins when she finds out she's pregnant. Thinking the baby's Norman's, she tricks Harry into believing he's the dad, using him for her and Norman's schemes. The baby, named Stanley, is actually Harry's. Lily bails on the kid, hoping to spare him from her messed up life. Her role in the Goblin Nation's uprising is another story altogether, but her Goblin days come to an end when she's cured of the Goblin serum's mental effects, keeping her powers intact. Post-Goblin life, Lily gets hit with amnesia and starts training under Black Cat, rebranding herself as Queen Cat. Hobgoblin. Roderick Kingsley is this cutthroat fashion mogul in New York City who dabbles in more than just clothes. He builds a financial empire, but not without stepping on a few toes, like rival designer Narda Ravana, aka Belladonna. Kingsley's big break into villainy comes when he snags the Green Goblin's gear from a sewer-crawling bank robber named George Hill. After making Hill move the gear, Kingsley gets rid of him with a hidden bomb in the van. As the Hobgoblin, Kingsley starts a blackmail spree and targets almost of his competition. Feeling he needs more muscle, Kingsley hunts down the Green Goblin's strength-boosting formula. He tests it on a small-time crook, Arnold Donovan, before using it himself. The formula beefs him up big time, almost matching Spider-Man's strength minus the Green Goblin's crazy side effects. Robin Bourne, Earth 9500. Robin Bourne, daughter of the 23rd century Spider-Man Max Bourne, was a total brainiac, especially when it came to time travel mechanics. She was also a professor at Empire State University, hanging out with a boyfriend, La Niven. Robin got interested in studying parallel universes and their effects on her timeline because she feared that a bigger universe might gobble up her own reality. So she whipped up this special time universe travel suit and stashed it in a temporal fold, always keeping it 10 seconds ahead in the future. Things get tricky when her dad, predicting she'll mess up the timeline, Goblin arrests her for crimes she hasn't even done yet. He chucks her into a virtual reality jail, planning to keep her there for 30 years. But La isn't going to let that happen. He breaks her out in 2211 with a nanovirus, which, whoops, makes her go a bit loopy and boosts her physical powers. Once she gets her suit back, Robin, now in the Hobgoblin persona, goes after her dad with a retcon bomb, trying to erase him from existence. Instead, she hits La by mistake. Hobgoblin then makes it a mission to wipe out every Spider-Man in the multiverse. When she tries to merge her reality with Earth 616 and Earth 928, messing with Peter Parker and Miguel O'Hara, her dad steps in and thwarts her plans. She later drags Earth 6078's Ben Parker to Earth 616 and baits Peter Parker into a fight. Max jumps in again, and in the chaos, Peter flips her retcon bomb back at her. Hobgoblin is wiped from existence, and everyone's memories of her fades away. Demo Goblin. Jason Philip Massendale Jr., better known as the Hobgoblin, has a rough time going up against Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. Looking for an edge, he tries to take advantage of the Inferno crisis, tracks down some demons, and confronts their boss, Nastir. Massendale offers his soul for power. Nastir, getting a kick out of this, agrees, but instead of a simple power-up, he has Massendale possessed by a demon. This possession beefs up Massendale with crazy strength, speed, and endurance. But there's a catch. The demon's not exactly a team player. Massendale and his demonic squatter have a power struggle until the demon splits, becoming the Demo Goblin. Demo Goblin's not your average villain. He's a zealot on a mission to purge sinners, which in his book is pretty much everyone except kids. This lands him in constant fights with Spider-Man, Ghost Rider, Venom, and even his ex-host, Massendale. Demo Goblin's crusade to cleanse New York City even leads him to team up with Carnage's crew, but true to his fanatic nature, he's not too thrilled about Carnage's chaotic ways. Poison Green Goblin. Poison Green Goblin is a pretty unique character in the Marvel Universe. He's a poison who took over the Green Goblin from Earth 77181. Now, these poisons are like alien symbiotes, and they don't mess around. This guy was part of the squad that nabbed Venompool, who was part of the Resistance but decided to join the Poisons. Later on, Poison Green Goblin joins the Hive's raid on Our Lady of Saints Church, an important spot for the Resistance. But Poison Green Goblin is also in the thick of it and defends the Hive's spaceship in Earth 22249. His run comes to an explosive end when Venom's rocket sets off a bomb that blows up the ship, taking out Poison Green Goblin and the rest. So yeah, Poison Green Goblin's stint in the Marvel world is short, but definitely action-packed. Android Green Goblin. The Android Green Goblin is basically a high-tech Norman Osborn doppelganger cooked up by Arcade to give Spider-Man a hard time. The twist is that Spider-Man never trips the trap, so this robotic goblin just hangs out in limbo for a while. A few years later, Spider-Man's buddy Ghost Spider accidentally sets off the trap. That's when Android Green Goblin springs into action and fights with Ghost Spider. Despite being a tough cookie, the Android Goblin can't outmatch Ghost Spider and ends up getting wrecked. Vassal, aka Green Goblin. The headsman first appears as Norman Osborn's tech guinea pig. His debut mission is to bust the enforcers out from Spider-Man's clutches, and he nails it, making Spidey beat a hasty retreat. Harry Osborn tips off Spider-Man about the bad guy's hangout, which leads to a battle where Headsman has to bail after Spider-Man wrecks his power pack. Not one to stay down, Headsman patches up his gear and joins forces with Lucky Lobo to take down Spider-Man. They think they have Spidey buried under rubble, but the web-slinger isn't out for the count. In their next face-off, Green Goblin crashes the party, reveals he's Headsman's boss, trashes Headsman's gear, and leaves him for Spider-Man to hand over to the cops. Later, Headsman is working with Osborn's Thunderbolts, a Black Ops squad. In this capacity, he attacks Air Force One disguised as Green Goblin. It's all a setup though. Osborn plays hero, saving the president by chucking the fake Goblin off the plane. Later, his teammate Ghost lets him in on a secret. The gravity grip gadget he used was dodgy, which meant that Osborn might have been cool with Headsman taking a fatal fall. Their next big job is to off Deadpool, but that turns into a total flop. Headsman also has a scrap with his new teammate Mr. X, but Black Widow chooses to spare him. Green Goblin, the actor. So, in Earth 1036, there's this actor playing the Green Goblin in a flick with Felix Lifson and Erin Haskell as Spider-Man and Spider-Woman. They're on set doing their thing when suddenly Octavia Otto rolls up with a whole crew of spider people from different corners of the multiverse. Talk about an unexpected cameo. But that's about it. Green Goblin, clone. Norman Osborn's story took a different turn when he didn't make it out of the fight with Spider-Man after Gwen Stacy's death. We meet Jackal, who has a plan to clone Norman. He aims to mess with Ben Reilly and Peter Parker, but before he can pull it off, Kane steps in and takes him out. However, Harry Osborn, who everyone thought was gone, pops up and snags the clone pod only to unleash Clone Norman. This version of Norman is actually pretty level-headed, never having been hit with the Goblin serum. He spends his time trying to get his son Harry, who is off the rails, to chill out on his villainous spree. In a final act of heroism, Clone Norman jumps in to save the Parkers and Baby May from a vengeful Harry. He pays the ultimate price, but his sacrifice stops Harry's plans in their tracks. So, in a wild twist of fate, Norman Osborn's clone ends up being the hero in a story where he's usually the villain. Green Goblin, Skrull. Before the whole secret invasion event started, there was this Skrull prophet who dropped a bombshell on the Skrull Queen. He said that Norman Osborn was going to be her undoing. Freaked out by this, the Queen switches up their invasion strategy. The Skrulls stay undercover, even post-mortem. Now, one Skrull gets the full Norman Osborn makeover. Memories, personality, the whole 9 yards. In fact, he genuinely thinks he is Osborn. When the Skrulls manage to secretly bring world peace, this Osborn Skrull is convinced that it was all Tony Stark's nanobots messing with people's heads. Determined to get to the bottom of it, he heads to the Savage Land. There, he runs into the Skrull Queen and her crew. That's when things get real. He has to face the fact that he isn't actually Norman Osborn. The revelation hits him hard. Struggling with this identity crisis, he can't handle it and ends his own life. Green Gopher. Green Gopher is one of Spider-Ham's quirky enemies. He confronts the pig superhero when Spider-Ham gets a power-up as Captain Zooniverse. Spider-Ham now has some serious cosmic punch and sends Green Gopher and a bunch of other bad guys into orbit. Quite literally. But yeah, nothing more to know here. Grave Goblin. He's a pawn of Goblin Queen and a member of the Insidious Six. Green Goblin versions in live action.
Hello, my dear.
Norman Osborn. In the 2002 Spider-Man movie, Willem Dafoe played the role of Norman Osborn, Oscorp's big boss and the main bad guy. Norman cared only about creating super soldiers and high-tech weapons. Things go sideways when he tests some performance enhancers on himself, which ultimately turns him into the Green Goblin. He goes on a rampage, knocks off his board of directors, and even tries to get Spider-Man on his villainous bandwagon. But in the epic fight near the Brooklyn Bridge, Norman meets his end. He gets skewered by his own glider, just like in the comics. His last words were, "Peter, don't tell Harry." In Spider-Man 2, Norman shows up again, but this time as a twist in Harry's mind. After Harry discovers Peter Parker is Spider-Man, he's haunted by visions of his dad, which push him to avenge Norman's death. Harry Osborn. In the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, Harry Osborn, played by James Franco, starts as Peter Parker's only pal in high school. By the end of the first movie, he's convinced Spider-Man killed his dad and is out for revenge. In Spider-Man 2, Harry's beef with Spider-Man leads him back to Dr. Octopus's crazy experiments, all in hopes of nabbing Spidey. But when he unmasks Spider-Man, surprise, it's his buddy Peter. That revelation hits Harry hard. He also discovers his dad's Green Goblin gear. In the third movie, Harry becomes the new Goblin. He's gunning for Peter, but takes a nasty spill and loses his memories. The two patch things up until Harry's memories flood back, and he gets sneaky, making Mary Jane dump Peter. It's not until his butler reveals about his dad's self-inflicted death that Harry sides with Peter against Venom and Sandman. In a tragic turn, Harry dies while helping Peter, but he apologizes with his last breath as Peter and Mary Jane mourn. Dane DeHaan then steps into Harry's shoes in the Amazing Spider-Man series, and he brings a different vibe to the character in a whole new continuity.
Alright, Hobgoblin. You're not the Hobgoblin. How?
Green Goblin animated versions. Goblin in Spider-Man the Animated Series. In Spider-Man the Animated Series, Norman Osborn, voiced by Neil Harris, has a bit of a different spin. Harris amps up the pitch for the Green Goblin's voice and gives him a distinct vibe. This Norman isn't your typical villain with a bunch of issues. Instead, he's grappling with multiple personality disorder, the Green Goblin emerging as things in his life start spiraling. Norman's still a business guy, but he's not your shady, under-the-table type. He's only mixed up with Kingpin because he's struggling with some hefty debts. And unlike the comics, where he's pretty harsh with Harry, animated Norman actually shows he cares about his son. Norman's last hurrah in the series is pretty dramatic. He kidnaps Mary Jane and takes her to the Brooklyn Bridge, but he gets sucked into another dimension thanks to his glider crashing into a rift made by the Spot's invention. Later, an alternate version of this Green Goblin reappears, working under Kingpin and alongside Spider Carnage and Hobgoblin.
Because I know your secret. I know whose face is behind that mask. We all...
Goblin in the Spectacular Spider-Man. In the Spectacular Spider-Man series, Norman Osborn is initially portrayed as one of the masterminds behind New York City's supervillain scene. He's in cahoots with big names like Hammerhead, Tombstone, and Dr. Octopus. Norman's hands are pretty dirty, being involved in creating bad guys like Rhino, Sandman, and Vulture. When the Green Goblin first shows up, it looks like Harry Osborn is behind the mask, but it was actually Norman pulling a fast one. Yep, this guy framed his own son for the Green Goblin's antics. Ultimate Green Goblin animated. In Ultimate Spider-Man, Norman Osborn, voiced by Steven Weber, is a major player in the show and prefers to work behind the scenes to nab Spider-Man. He's trying to create super soldiers using Spidey's powers, with Dr. Octopus lending a hand. Norman's pretty pretty much his usual self, a bit distant with his son Harry and curious about Peter Parker's smarts. Things get wild when Dr. Octopus captures Norman. After a mishap caused by Norman, Doc Ock injects him with venom and Spider-Man's blood. Naturally, this turns him into a beastly version of the Green Goblin. This Green Goblin is a blend of savage strength and limited smarts and remains in line with the ultimate Green Goblin from the comics. He breaks free from Doc Ock's grip and gives Peter and his buddies a tough time, but Peter manages to stand his ground. Later, Norman regains his intelligence and hops onto his iconic glider. He tries to get Harry to join the dark side with the Venom symbiote, but Harry's not really interested. However, Harry does get the symbiote in the latest Spider-Man game. Anyway, Norman bounces after wreaking havoc on the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier and almost finishes Spider-Man. However, it's not before long that he wants to get rid of the Goblin formula. He genuinely wants to fix his mistakes and even become the Iron Patriot, but Doc Ock turns him back into the Green Goblin. Spidey saves him again, and Norman turns back into a human, kinda becoming one of the good guys. In the series finale, Norman steps up to help restore Spider-Man's powers after Doc Ock zaps them away. Turns out, Norman knew Spider-Man was Peter all along, but kept it a secret as an act of gratitude. Dark Goblin. In Marvel's Spider-Man Season 1, Episode 3, Norman Osborn is the big boss at Oscorp Industries. However, Norman was pretending to be Harry. And not just that, he was trying to pretend as the Hobgoblin as Harry. Can you believe that? Things go south when he's caught in an explosion at Oscorp, which everyone thinks he doesn't survive. Of course, Norman makes it out alive, but not without some serious damage. In fact, he loses his left hand and right leg. However, he uses a combo with Venom's seed and Jackal's formula to transform into the Dark Goblin. This new identity doesn't just give him a menacing look, it also heals his injuries.
It's not off. Why won't you quit? I guess I like
Green Goblin in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. In Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the ultimate version of the Green Goblin is voiced by Jorma Taccone. He's friends with Kingpin and shows up in the early scenes as one of the heavy hitters. When Spider-Man sneaks into the lab to wreck Kingpin's wild particle accelerator, Goblin is the guy sent to take him down. Miles Morales gets a front row seat to their fight. Amidst this, the accelerator kicks into gear and rips open a portal to the multiverse. In the chaos, Green Goblin gets slammed by some heavy debris. That's the last we see of him in the movie. It looks like he's out for the count. So yeah, that's all the 44 variants of the Green Goblin. If you've reached this point in the video, I'm pretty sure you'd be interested in checking out similar videos on other awesome characters. So hang around. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.